All right, welcome. Today we're going to break down a legal document that, honestly, reads more like a declaration of war than a typical court filing. It's a direct, meticulously crafted accusation aimed squarely at a sitting judge, and believe me, it pulls no punches. Let's get into it.
Yeah, you heard that right. That's how the author describes their own motion. It is such a bold claim, and it totally sets the stage for one of the most confrontational court filings you will probably ever see. It promises a professional takedown. No threats, nothing like that, but designed to be, in its own words, professionally devastating. So, at its core, this is a motion filed in a Nevada court, but its true target isn't some obscure legal point. It's one person, Judge Barry L. Breslow. The filing straight up accuses him of being the architect, supervisor, executor, and proud overseer of every single alleged constitutional violation in the entire case. And the language, wow, it is just incredibly charged. The defendant argues this isn't a normal prosecution at all, but a hostage situation. And he claims that every unconstitutional turn, every retaliatory order came directly from Judge Breslow himself, not from prosecutors, not from clerks. The responsibility, the motion argues, is his and his alone.
So you might be wondering, okay, how could something like this even happen? Well, to explain that, the motion presents this core theory it calls the Barry firewall. It alleges that the court has created a kind of closed feedback loop, one that's specifically designed to deflect criticism, block any challenges, and basically insulate itself from any accountability. And this is key, because it shows you exactly how this alleged system works. The motion lays out this five-step process. First, the judge does something irregular. Second, the defendant tries to document it. Third, the clerk blocks that filing from ever seeing the light of day. Fourth, the judge then claims, well, there's no record of any issue. And finally, in step 5, the defendant is punished for even trying to raise the alarm. As the motion puts it, this is not an accident. This is a system by design. Okay, so you can't just make a huge claim like that without some evidence, right? Well, the motion comes prepared. It presents what it sarcastically calls Judge Breslow's sua sponte greatest hits. This is basically a list of specific incidents that it claims show a very clear pattern of misconduct coming directly from the judge himself. Now, before we get into that list, we've got to understand this key term, sua sponte. It's Latin, and it basically means the judge is acting on their own impulse, on their own initiative. The motion uses this term over and over again to hammer home the point that these weren't decisions prompted by lawyers, but actions the judge allegedly took all by himself. And this timeline, wow, it really illustrates the motion's argument of a retaliatory pattern. Just look at the dates. It alleges a secret hearing on December 5th, a cover-up order just 4 days later on the 9th, a premature order to show cause on the 16th, and then a no-bail warrant just 3 days after that on the 19th. The motion argues this timing is no coincidence. It's chronological evidence of retaliation. So here are those greatest hits in a bit more detail. The motion alleges there was a secret, off-the-record hearing, an unauthorized competency hearing, a gag order to criminalize the defendant's speech, a premature order issued 2 months too early, and finally, a no-bail warrant that was issued right after the defendant filed federal litigation against the court. This line right here, it's one of the sharpest in the entire document. It's aimed at the court's use of a specific legal tool to try and retroactively justify that secret hearing from December 5th. The motion is essentially saying, hey, you can't just use a legal document to rewrite history. So what the heck is nunc pro tunc? Well, it's an order that backdates an action. It's usually meant to correct a minor mistake, like a typo. But this motion argues it was misused in a huge way. Not to fix a typo, but to create the illusion of procedural regularity for a hearing that was allegedly improper from the get-go. The no-bail warrant is another huge piece of this puzzle, and the motion presents a really stark contrast here. On the one hand, it claims the warrant was based on nothing more than a story from a prosecutor who was later fired for abhorrent conduct. On the other hand, the actual legal standard for a warrant like this is incredibly high. You need a new violent act, proof the person is a flight risk, or new evidence of danger, none of which, the motion argues, ever existed. And this brings us to the most aggressive part of the whole document. After laying out its entire case, the motion switches gears and goes for a direct confrontation. It actually poses a series of pointed questions directly to Judge Breslow, demanding he clarify his actions on the record. So, question number 1, it's a total bombshell. It asks the court if it recognizes a key filing as fraudulent, especially since it came from a prosecutor who was fired by his own office for disturbing conduct. It basically forces the judge to either stand by those filings or admit they're tainted. Then you get question 2, which is all about personal accountability. It's asking the judge to stop deflecting and to acknowledge his own alleged role in that whole series of constitutional violations from the greatest hits list. It's a direct challenge to that Barry firewall theory. Question 3 isn't just asking for an opinion, it demands action. It asks the judge directly if he's going to cancel the no bail warrant, which the motion frames not as a legal necessity, but as a purely punitive measure used to punish the defendant for filing federal lawsuits. And then the final question, the big one. The motion asks if the judge will recuse himself. It argues that a judge presiding over a case that involves their own alleged misconduct, their own gag orders, and their own retaliatory actions, well, that creates an undeniable conflict of interest. Okay, look at this. This slide really breaks down the genius, or maybe the sheer audacity of this strategy. It's basically a rhetorical trap. For every question, there's an ultimatum. If the answer is yes, the judge has to correct the record. If the answer is no, he has to justify his actions. And silence? Well, the motion flatly declares that silence will be interpreted as a confession. There's really no easy way out. So why are we spending all this time on one single court filing? Well, because it's so much more than that. It's a fascinating, if pretty extreme, example of how a defendant, representing themselves, can use the court's own rules to force a direct confrontation over judicial accountability. And just to be crystal clear, the motion lays out exactly what it wants. These are not vague complaints. They are specific, concrete demands. It asks the court to quash the warrant, strike the prosecutor's filing, acknowledge the secret hearing, vacate all related orders, and officially take notice of the prosecutor's termination. Basically, to unwind every single action it claims was unconstitutional. And it all wraps up with this incredibly powerful final ultimatum. It presents the judge with 3, and only 3, distinct paths. The motion argues that only one of them, restoring integrity, actually strengthens the rule of law. The other 2, well, they'd only confirm the defendant's allegations. So in the end, it almost doesn't matter what happens in the specific case. The motion itself stands as a kind of blueprint for a challenge. It shows a strategy of using meticulously documented facts and incredibly aggressive legal language to turn the tables and, in effect, put the system itself on trial. And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. This motion, with all its surgical disrespect, is one person's answer. But it really makes you wonder about the broader implications for justice. When the normal checks and balances seem to fail, what tools are even left for a citizen to demand accountability from the people in power?